Early this year, we partnered with iQuanti for a powerful webinar, How AI is Rewriting the Rules in Banking. That conversation explored how generative AI platforms like ChatGPT, Claude, and Perplexity are changing the very foundation of search shifting the focus from keyword rankings to citations, mentions, and structured data that AI systems can easily surface. Interesting, we also revealed which banks are succeeding in this new environment and why aggregators like NerdWallet and Bankrate lead in visibility, and how elements like site speed and content structure are transforming discoverability. We are rejoining Justin Harris, VP of Search Optimization at iQuanti, to explore more of the nuanced challenges that have arisen as this AI search landscape continues to evolve. It's no longer about just Google. There are a lot of other players we have to answer to. We're going to discuss not only the technical requirements that we previously covered, but also the strategic shifts, competitive pressures, and the emerging opportunities that will distinguish the winners in this background for the laggards. We're also going to explore how you can go beyond survival mode and adopt strategies that make your brand not only visible, but trusted, influential, and preferred. So, Justin, apologize for the long introduction, but you guys are covering a lot of different things and actually in the sweet spot of anybody that develops content or is wanting to get found in a very, very busy marketplace where being found is more difficult every day. So during our previous webinar, we discussed how domain authority above 60 greatly enhances citation opportunities. For banks that are still working on building their authority, what emerging signals are AI platforms using to assess credibility that may lead to faster visibility?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Jim. And I know that the domain authority, that 60 threshold that we had discussed from our study findings, can be intimidating for some, and seem like, oh, if I'm not there, is it worth doing the efforts at all? It's definitely not the case. What we're seeing very much is there are specific signals, specific factors that have come out where, while you're, let's say, in parallel, while you're working towards this overarching stronger SEO foundation, because that's really at the core of AI search, is very much built on strong SEO fundamentals that you have today and that you're building towards. So while that's being built up and that authority is getting to that threshold that we've identified, there's definitely a handful of things. One of the more interesting things we've seen is on the freshness of content. So really that fresh, trustworthy information, it beats just being a large website of massive domain authority. So we're seeing that the LLMs very much want to be citing recent content. And there was a whole, we've seen it at our end, and we've also seen from other studies published that are talking about this freshness window, where based on industry, the LLMs are looking for more current and recent information. So within the finance space, for example, we've seen actually one of the shorter windows of being for these core pages, important topics. You really want to be refreshing that content could be quarterly, every 3 to 6 months at most. And pages that haven't been refreshed in a year or more, really the visibility that they're getting across AI search, it takes a massive hit. So that's one of those, I think, low hanging fruit opportunities to go right after while working towards a bigger picture, is what are the pages? And we have this whole process of prioritizing pages and what that content refresh would look like. But that's one item right there out of the gate that can be done, that will signal to the LLMs, the AI platforms, that your content is worth being cited. So there's that freshness factor, and other things like, they want to see, real voices, real conversation. So things that can be done to either incorporate, certain, let's say local banking question and answers, or working in reviews, things like that, and then really showing up where the LLMs are citing as sources. So there's things that you can do on your website, but then there's where the LLM's going to really come up with the answer, and look at those third-party sites. So making sure that you're visible on the right websites that they go to, and you're in the conversation that they're scanning through. So those are things that can be done where you could be showing up in the answers regardless of your domain authority. As you're working towards that, those few things are really out of the gate items you could do along the way.
And financial institutions forget that they have the ability to develop content that is unlike any other organization, even in their own industry. You can ask your customer survey questions, they're very basic, maybe one at a time, and ask them to participate. That keeps the freshness high. And these platforms also want insights that can't be found elsewhere, correct?
Oh yes, there's it's one of those their uniqueness factor is the way it often gets referenced, where you have hundreds to thousands of websites that are honestly recycling a lot of the same information in what they present and answering what certain information around interest rates, or what definitions of terms. What the LLMs are looking for is what is unique that's coming from your page that stands out amongst the sea of identical answers. How can you stand out? So that could be use creation of first party data. You're doing surveys and posting a stat on a given page that makes it stand out. It could be just really anything that helps stand out. The reviews we were just talking about, but yeah, that the uniqueness factor is one of those major areas that even I'd say very much on the local side, that's its own competitive edge.
Well, it's interesting because we discussed a little bit the last time that really this isn't something that's defined by the size of organization. Obviously, if you're a really, really, really large organization, you get hit because you have so many different components of your insight you can share, ranging from a shareholder report to research you're doing, all these other things. But this does not mean that a mid-sized, small, or a regional bank can't build some pretty quick citation currency, correct? And how do they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's one of those situations where there are certain larger websites that have this massive starting point of citation share and all of that. They definitely start off in a strong space, but that doesn't mean that you can't make up that gap and really build up that citation currency as you were referencing. So there are things that ultimately it centers on two things. We think about this SEO foundation, like how strong that is, lean heavier into it. Because as I was mentioning before, we see very much that overlap of strong SEO, lean in heavier, but how much from there, how much are you layering in the extra pieces that the LLMs in particular are weighing maybe more than Google would? So that's things like the way you structure information on a page. You think of tables is something we've spoken, I think, last time around. Having those structured tables, like a comparison table or a product table on your page, or short summary statements at the top of a page that really summarize what this page is about, or even who this page is best for. Maybe there's a few bullet points on like the practical use. So if you can think about the way that the bots are coming to a page and what they're looking for, you really speak directly to that and make it very just on a silver platter of the information structured in a way that the bots will read it. That gives you an edge over sites that maybe have a much larger presence and much larger websites, but it's how you structure the content that is something that can give that edge.
It's also interesting in that organizations may try to take a shortcut. They may want to build some content using AI to build the content. And the reality of that is AI searches within itself to find content. So if you're using that as a tool, it may be helpful on a broad state basis, but it's not giving anything new and nuanced because you're getting it from the source that they're trying to move beyond. They're trying to move beyond themselves with regard to citation currency. You mentioned in the previous engagement with me financial aggregators like NerdWallet and Bankrate that they hold a significant share of citations. Since our last discussion, have you seen any successful examples of how financial institutions have maybe partnered with these platforms or developed strategies to compete with them for direct AI search results?
Yes, I would say the of everything that we've been looking into and we study on I'd say an unhealthy level of obsession around AI search, it's interestingly the affiliate side that has stood out the most to me. And has gotten the strongest response from the clients that we're working with. And what we're seeing very much is you have the affiliates themselves have such a large impact on where the LLMs are citing information from, and driving so much of what that answer is. So they're going to, ChatGPT is going to that nerd wallet, to that bank rate, to those key affiliate, aggregator sites. And whether we like it or not, that's what's driving the answers. And they don't care, right? At least right now, the LMs don't care. Is this, paid inclusion? Is this sponsored content, or is it not? It's not a factor. And we see it across every time I'm looking at lists of, for certain prompts or topics, what websites are getting cited the most. It is consistently the same grouping of affiliates, and let's say Reddit, would be that handful of items. And it's been such a just clear, definitive response that we built out an entire advisory on just this one single piece of how to guide affiliate spend and how to really point the resources and investments you're already doing just in a very specific direction, because we can see through our tools not only what domains are really having that outsized impact on the answers, on like what brands are mentioned, but we can see literally what pages on those domains. So if we're seeing that this page right here is getting cited 10 times more than this page right here, but your spending is mostly on this page, we can act as that, really that layer of, okay, here's where we're seeing that impact is, and that's ChatGPT is going to this one right here more. And as soon as I start saying that, I'm noticing ears perking up, and anyone on the performance marketing side, I'm suddenly their best friend, a favorite person around. Okay, we're spending large sums of money within this space. Now this is a way to get extra value at it, and try to keep the spend as efficient as possible. So that's really right now when it comes to items for me personally that I would say you focus on day one. And I know there's, different brands may want to lean away from the affiliate side. Right now, it's one of the largest impact things you can do, because the
Well,
LLMs want to see what are they saying about your brand and others.
well, it's interesting because it goes back to what you said before. NerdWallet and Bankrate have continuously updated, almost by the minute, data sets. So this is one of those things that, really goes beyond normal, but it does point to what you said before is the best way to go about getting citations. You mentioned Reddit. We talked about it a little bit the last time. I understand that there's a lot of reason why financial institutions may shy away from um, leveraging Reddit at all because it can go rogue on you. But how do you operate in an environment where you have limited control? What is the importance of including platforms like Reddit in your AI visibility strategy? And what suggestions do you give to financial institutions around being able to integrate with it safely and comfortably?
So Reddit is definitely, of everything, probably one of the most hot button type topics, where there's one undeniable fact in the equation is that Reddit is arguably the most influential website that exists right now when it comes to search itself. So you have, at the same time, they have their partnerships with Google, where they have a major influence on what's showing up in a standard Google search result. There's the forum section, which is now getting centered more so just literally to Reddit. It's informing the AI overviews, it's informing AI modes. So you have this impact on search just right out of the gate. And now on the other side, they have that partnership with OpenAI and ChatGPT. And you can literally see it in the numbers of how often Reddit is being cited. It's just become the go-to credibility layer, and that go-to, like, no BS, let's see what the people are saying, is the way that these platforms have been viewing Reddit. So you do have this reality that its influence is undeniable and massive. At the same time, you have the opposing side of that reality that brands are definitely, financial brands are not overly comfortable with the idea of embracing that fact and what that means. So like we've, myself in particular, I've had to rack my own brain on strategies to talk to clients around, there's like these different playbooks developed where if you're comfortable actually, playing and, rolling your sleeves up and playing in the mud of Reddit, there's a whole path around, you know, building out your own subreddit and certain best practices and where to, what conversations to take part in, and making sure you're remaining compliant and, really not being overly promotional. So there's certain, tactical and, strategic recommendations we give within Reddit. But at the same time, we do also recognize that even with the greatest of business cases, not every bank financial brand is going to get buy-in because they do view it as you're opening yourself up to the negativity, you're opening yourself up to conversation you can't control. In many ways I do liken it to the earlier social media days because it's the same conversations that were had of we don't want to take a part in Twitter, on Facebook, on these platforms because we can't control the conversation. And so it's that I think there is this reality where Reddit, it's going to shift away from being a nice to have to being a must have. But at the same time, there's, one of this, I was trying to think a little outside of the box of how do we leverage the impact of Reddit without actually having to go onto Reddit. So there is another approach that we've been, experimenting, working with where it's more so, tying in Reddit into, let's say, your own customer feedback loops. So if you have, let's say, you have, your own, existing processes of after, let's say, a mortgage is approved or a claim resolution, all these interactions where you do, let's say, a survey follow up, and you have happy customers. You've identified these happy customers who are, have a positive sentiment of your brand. As a final little step in that sequence, based on the intel we could provide, it's okay. What you can suggest pointing that happy customer to this subreddit right here, where people are asking for, experiences that people have had, with either a brand or just in general getting a credit card approved or a claim resolved. So if you can leverage the existing momentum of happy customers pointed in the areas that we know have influence, that's, I'd say a little bit more outside of the box way to try to tap into that potential. But even that runs into its own challenges. So it's one of those, there needs to be a path forward because Reddit is just, it's become too important. It affects everything within
Well,
search.
and you brought up the idea of Twitter at the beginning. We were all concerned about, oh my God, customers who use this to publicly complain. They said that about Facebook. They said that about LinkedIn. The reality is, you need to have response. You can't just let those things fester and hope they go away because they're not going to. But in much the same sense, to know what customers may be saying negatively about you gives the opportunity to at least respond to the situation and deal with it in a way that's much better than ignoring it. Because if people want to complain about you, they will find their platform. It's not like Reddit's the only platform they're going to use. So I think, again, you have to be aware of the challenges, but also realize they're the devil you kind of have to deal with. It's interesting because as we've transformed the way search works and the multiple ways it now works, we have to move beyond, having a KPI that says we want to be in the first 3 to 5 spots on Google, or uh, uh, a click-through rate or organic visits or conversions. There's a lot of different things we have to measure now with these new tools. If you're trying to measure success, and in fact, many financial institutions are having a hard time with any part of AI measuring success right now. But in this realm that we're talking about, what does success look like in the first place? If you have a bank interested in exploring the efforts of AI search, where do they start?
No, it's a great question, Jim. And I would say with we're seeing this disruption unlike anything I've seen in, 17 years within the space. With that, I think one of the most fundamental shifts that have occurred is that exact detail of KPIs and measurement and how we think about that piece and what success even means in the first place. Because, within you've got the SEO space where it's that same handful of pieces of, top 3 ranked and, those conversion rates on that traffic and, just all these different pieces of that chain that lead to that conversion. With AI search, for starters, there's a lot less information. So you have the SEO space. It's at this maturity level where you have tools that can see everything and you can measure everything. We're really at the infancy right now of AI search, where there are definitely pieces that we can and do measure. For example, being able to see visibility scores around, let's say, a handful of prompts that you feel would be ones that your customers would be searching. They go into these AI platforms, do a search. How often are you showing up? So that's something we can measure. What, the rate at which you're being, so there's two pieces: showing up in the answer and then being cited as the source. So
Right.
the rate at which you are being seen as the source of the answer is a huge part of the equation. And that speaks to how the LLMs are viewing you, and are you structured the right way. So you want to be the one being sourced as an answer. Otherwise, your brand, the way your brand is spoken about, is driven by others. So you have some of these pieces around the visibility side, and then you have the more granular of like LLM referral traffic. You can see within your Adobe, your GA4, how much traffic you're getting from ChatGPT. Now, the problem that is probably the largest problem that exists in the space right now is that the attribution of business impact, there's just a major gap, because the average person who's doing a chat GPT search, it's not like the brands that show up. There's a big, beautiful, clickable part to the name, and it takes you directly to that brand's, to that bank's homepage. It's very much, here's an answer, and then tiny little thing, here's 10 sources we're citing, and 10 sources we're
Yeah.
citing. So you have this massive gap where you can track the actual people who do click, but what it's not accounting for is how many people are now going and typing in americanexpress.com or city.com into their browser for direct traffic, or are going to Google and typing in, let's say, your one of your credit card products, or your more, whatever it may be, and now that's a organic search that was a branded click. Or they're going to Reddit, and then from there Reddit connecting to the website. So what we're building out, we have this like massive command center we're building out to try to now take all of these scattered data points from, let's say, a SEMrush to a visibility tool to a branded click to referral traffic, and find those correlations around, okay, we did this tactic, we saw visibility go up this right here, and now 10 days later we're noticing this uptick in branded search, which led to this conversion. So it's the biggest challenge is filling that attribution gap, because it all has to tie back to revenue and tie back to impact. And right now it's definitely a gap that exists, that I know we're working relentlessly on.
Well, and it's interesting. The marketplace is changing truly every minute. In the old days, in the old days were like a couple months ago. We were trying to figure out what are the Google algorithms. How do we not beat the system, but how do we play with the system? Well, as you referenced, you're taking pieces all over the place and bringing them together, saying, what happens if I turn this up, turn this down, all these different things you're doing along the way for your clients. Is this one of the ways that your firm really helps your clients in a way that you're continually testing these algorithms, testing these ways that LLMs are working in conjunction with Google, because you don't want to lose all Google search when you're getting the LLMs. The reality is this one of the benefits that organizations can have in working with a third party provider that really focuses almost entirely on search optimization? Is this one of the things you can bring to the table because you work with other financial institutions? And obviously, helping one or sharing what you've done at one does not hurt another. It actually raises the tide. Is that one of the things that iQuanti really does as much as anything else?
Yeah, I would say it's what we do every second of every day, is entirely around the search visibility, and we test everything. I would say we're very known for our data quantitative analysis
Yep.
obsession, where we're not just making statements in a vacuum. We spend, while people were kind of racing ahead to market these AI search services, we were quietly in the background conducting these massive quantitative studies to determine what the factors truly were, before even coming to our own clients to tell them, here's what we're seeing. So we're very much this slow at first to make sure we felt strong in the data. And now with that foundation, kind of shifting that dial to the constant daily testing, constant daily analysis, and seeing, okay, what is actually driving impact. And for us, we're almost, I'd say we're pretty much exclusively within the financial sector. So we're a bit uniquely positioned where the studies we conduct are only, banks and credit card companies and lenders and, wealth managers. So we're everything is from that lens of financial perspective, because there are unique elements that, really just only impact the financial sector versus others. So yeah, we live and breathe, and I know me personally, I live and breathe this every second, constantly testing, because
I remember you saying that the last time
yeah,
too.
it's true, and I very much, this space, it evolves much quicker than like Google. It was very much, you had an algorithm update, to your point, and now it was, okay, how's my site doing post update? Do I need to make certain changes and evolve with that? But that change could last you a year, years
It's
maybe.
not like
Now,
these things get posted though. It's not, you have to learn it by doing, because these platforms don't go, well, we're going to put this above this. No, you almost have to see how it works in the industry and see what happens to see the trends. And when you look at that, when you look at the new AI platforms, they update their algorithms, look at different trends and all this. And what recently have you seen happen where you all of a sudden got up from your desk or from your bedside table, wherever you were working, and said, oh my gosh, I might have discovered something here. What have you seen noticing that really takes what that financial institutions should say, look at this new trend when you are looking at ranking financial content, getting assessed at a higher level. What have you seen that got you kind of excited to go, I didn't see this a while, but now I'm seeing it happen.
yeah, I would say one of the earlier things was, and continue to be, Reddit, not to beat that one to death, of you could, but there's like staggering increases, not like a 10% uptick. It was like doubling of share of citation, was very much the importance of Reddit. But one of the things I've paid, and we as a group have paid close particular attention to, is, interestingly enough, or ironically enough, the reliance on Google and Google's index. So out of the gate, ChatGPT was very much positioned and spoken to as a, oh, well, they're indexing through Bing, and everyone's thinking about, oh, like Bing SEO, am I showing up in Bing and that's feeding ChatGPT? And you had, from our study findings, we saw Perplexity and AI overviews in particular were very much Google oriented and very focused on, if you're ranking in the top X number of spots on Google, there was definitive correlation to, the visibility and how much you're showing up on those other platforms. But it was always ChatGPT that was a bit of this, okay, that's Bing. But then there were these little whispers and things that we were starting to notice about, well, that's interesting. That looks a little bit more Google, index related. And it got to a point where, it's in the last few weeks, month or so, where it was just, at least for a period of time, it was clear as day, to the point where we were looking at the, almost like you look at click through rates. If you're first position, you should expect to get 25% of clicks, and second position, 15%, and so on. We're seeing identical things with the, what spots on Google we're getting, what percent of citations in on ChatGPT. And it literally read like the click through rate charts of, well, first spot was, getting cited the most at, this 15%, and second spot was getting, it was like definitive down to the first 20 or 30 positions. That was one of those, well, holy, well, that's
Yeah.
interesting, because it, because these factors very much play a role in what we can do about it. And, like the tools that we build, we're always building these tools to simulate the results of the right now from the algorithms. So, but at the same time, we do have to be, to your point, we are very vigilant around just the rate at which the updates occur. So yes, right
So
now
on
there's
that,
definitive that Google bias, but
yep.
that doesn't mean it'll be that way 6 months from now.
When you're talking about the rates in which these changes occur, how fast are these changes happen? I know we're not just talking about one platform anymore, like Google. We're looking at multiple platforms, some that outperform others at times. Wait, how often are you seeing these shifts in the way things are assessed?
In some ways, I'd call it daily, but you have, so like with, if you, let's say we isolate ChatGPT for a moment, you have these two components where one is its training model. So you have, one bot that, kind of sends out and is exploring, and is building out what's going to be that next set of training model data. So when you ask a question and it gives you that immediate answer without the thinking and the searching, that's its training model data. So you have that's kind of always out there, and it's always looking, and the factors around that are constantly evolving. But then there's that live search component where it's a separate bot. That's that what's called that RAG. That's this retrieval component where on the spot, it's now going out there and scanning, and it's now looking for whatever these XYZ factors are. It's definitely within any one platform, the factors are changing very rapidly. But in some ways, so is Google. Google has that, there's elements that are always changing, then there are these wider algorithm updates. I would liken it to that, but almost quicker cycles. There's quicker these kind of overhauls of some of the factors, I'd say. But it's just a pace. But what's very interesting is like the domino surrounding pieces where the space is seeing daily updates like I've never seen before. Like even like Instagram being crawled by Google, which started in mid-July, which now is all of a sudden impacting, let's say, the rate at which an Instagram post might impact a chat GPT outcome. Or so that's really the more interesting thing is that the search and AI search space is moving so quickly that the platforms are evolving at that same pace and quicker. So it's like a compound speed.
Yeah, it's hard to keep track of it. If you're a small community bank or credit union, let's say under $10 billion, how does the ability to leverage local market knowledge and any relationship advantages, how does that help AI systems recognize and cite their data? I'm trying to you've talked about so many things that are so grandiose, and I'd love to work at a Chase or a Wells to be able to leverage all the insights I have as well as the outside organizations I can partner with. But if I'm a small bank or credit union, what's the way I can like outmaneuver the big guys in my local market?
So what's interesting about that is that I would actually view this being that smaller community level bank credit union as being a superpower for these banks. And it's really the fact that they can leverage this local market knowledge and relationships in ways that the larger ones are less likely to. So if you think about, let's say, a local community bank, the idea of, let's say, publishing local financial guide. Maybe it's a first time home buyer guide, grants in blank county. If you isolate that specific county they're located in, and you have all this awesome information that's super specific to just that county right there. What you've done is you've now created content that possesses such a hyper local uniqueness. And this goes back to what we were saying earlier. The LLMs are looking for uniqueness. So by being this smaller bank, and you now, if you tap into that and really lean into that reality and go very local and very specific in the content you create, you've suddenly created something that there's not going to be. If you think about some of these broader focuses, there's going to be hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of other websites saying and going after the same thing. But you've now created something that is going to have such a smaller group of other websites talking about that you just created this, again, this uniqueness level that is really, it's an advantage. And it's something I would very, very much suggest, leaning into. So whether that's, because let's say either you use, let's say, the city or location in your search. So I'm someone who's looking for, I'm buying a home and I'm looking for, mortgage options locally. Either I'm going to use the city or location in my prompt, and there's that qualifier, or ChatGPT already is pulling and seeing the IP address, and it's presenting local options. So if you are now leaning into that and creating content that's super specific and unique to that location, you've now positioned yourself to show up in ways that companies 100 times your size are not going to have that same advantage.
Well, that's interesting. We talked about the last time also about product comparison pages and calculators. How do financial institutions, how should they structure product comparison pages and calculators to maximize AI delivery? Because I get the sense that almost every institution does everything the same way, but I'm starting to think that these types of content pages can be developed differently to possibly increase the discoverability in this new world?
Absolutely. And some of them are just very, very basic best practices. Like, we mentioned before, the use of these tables. So creating an HTML, like very code-based table that is just basic run-of-the-mill table. Doing that right there is one thing that you're creating content that the AI platforms are salivating for. There, it's easy to read, it's clear. That one thing, boom, it's just one on a checklist. For calculators, I would very much suggest, for lack of better terms, show your work. So don't just show the calculator result. If there are ways that you could explain the assumptions, the formulas, the eligibility rules in just plain language and tables, right there. It's making it very readable for the bots when they land. And now it gives them that context of what the value of the calculator and its results are. And I mentioned it earlier, those, summarize up front. So you might have something, a bullet where it's, best for small businesses or best for that utilization piece. They're very much big into just very clear and direct, less marketing speak and more just direct answering and giving that information on who this is valuable for. So I would do those few things right there and have an element of just keeping it fresh and current, going back to that, earlier piece. You do those things, you're making these pages as just magnets for being cited.
So I've heard recently that it's not just the great summary, but not to avoid the deep dive into things that AI tends to like the deeper dives, at least in the development of their models and pointing consumers your way. Is that true, or am I just hearing a false rumor out there?
No. So it's a combination of the two. You have, and it's very much when we think about how to approach maybe an existing page. I think you alluded to it early on. It's not okay, let's throw out everything we're doing
Right.
and only focus on the LLM side, because if no other reason, Google is still the behemoth in the room, and it's still driving the majority of business, the overwhelming majority of business. It's very much a, lean into and keep those SEO fundamentals and foundation, and where are the ways that we can layer in. So if we think of an existing important page that, let's say, has strong SEO performance, it ranks well for these high intent, high impact type keywords. It's very much, keep doing what you're doing from an SEO perspective, but also layer in that short summary statement. So you want to have that mixture of meat that can go into that detail, while having at the top, let's say, some of those more easy to parse and pull for the bots, and land, grab it and get out type of thing. So it's very much a mixture of the two, and as much as it's making sure you have that breadth of content on your website. So there's this premise, I think it's named way too technical, but this query fan out. But the premise of someone asks a question, the LLMs are digging into 10 other questions that are related, or 20 other. So it's making sure that you're speaking to that full, what are those other related questions that they, would want to see an answer to come up with that one answer. So making sure you cover that between, that existing page and other pages that, interlink to one another.
Yep.
It's really breadth of coverage is very much a factor. It's not just short snippet to the point.
you know, Things happen so fast. It wasn't too long ago we had the previous webinar on some of the same topic, but different angles. Since our last webinar, you mentioned this before we even started the webinar today, integrating customer reviews and third-party validation. You said it's becoming increasingly important in AI search results. What strategies should financial institutions adopt to more effectively utilize customer feedback in their AI search methods?
Yeah, part of it is the same things that we would typically tell clients, if we were, let's say way back when, a million months ago, when before the AI search revolution, we would tell clients, lean into third party validation. That's always been the case because Google likes to see that, and users like to see that. It's
Yep.
a user experience, it's a conversion mindedness. So it's the same thing and just more of it when it comes to AI search. So lean into that third party validation, lean into as much as you can, JD Power categories or Better Business Bureau, Consumer Affairs, the Google profile, as well as those other, review type of sites like your Trust Pilots and such, because they are that's the LLMs. It's a factor in really that credibility and what are others saying about you, and then it's there's that user generated piece that I think we were discussing before in terms of whether it's conversation that you're seeding and participating in on a forum like a Reddit, or you're guiding your customers, that feedback loop of customer feedback, guiding them towards leaving that feedback in a forum that we see is getting picked up. But it's as it was a huge factor and is a huge factor for SEO, it's as much or more within AI search around the LLMs and search itself. You're saying this about you, but we want to see what everyone else is saying too. So I would very much, if you haven't already, lean into third party. You can even just start with the dipping of the toes, but third party reviews, third party validation, it's crucial across the board if you just think of search holistically, which is how we do think about it.
Well, and organizations don't do it very well, if they do it at all, is actually to publish some of these reviews within your website. It's again, look for opportunities to give brand new, insightful content that can be found, but also provides you something that continually refreshes the site. It used to be that rates or fees were the way we changed the site. We had to do that. Well, two things happen. Number one, there's other ways to keep your site refreshed beyond rates and fees. But the other side of that is more than ever, you need to have real-time accuracy. If your fees are going to change or rates are going to change at 4 o'clock today, you better make sure that every platform is updated at 4 o'clock today. So how do financial institutions organize their content management process to ensure that everything's updated at the moment of change?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that most to all financial service firms need to think about. So, things that we suggest is one being having a single source of truth page. So, when it comes to rates and fees, have that source of truth page where when it's updated on that page for sure, and having timestamps. That's a big piece. Is you making it very clear. There's elements within the code that can be seen, but also on page, having that timestamp update, that makes it very clear. This has been updated. This is when it was updated, and this is our, this source of truth page. So there's that factor, and then I would say being disciplined about freshness in a sense of don't update those dates unless something really changed. So that's really it's like a trust factor, with the AI platforms.
Yeah.
Everyone's always trying to, find an edge. This is one where you want to make sure there's a real change that's occurred, and build up that trust. And I would say it's very much a process thing when it comes to try to time out that as much as you can, where legal signs off, whatever needs to be signed off on, legal compliance, updates go live, that like coordinated effort versus, one before the other. I would say it's that, as much as you can automate and at least, operationalize the approvals, that plays I'd say a big role.
So it's interesting. I've been in sales most of my career in one way or the other. And one thing they would always say was the so what? What's your so what? In other words, yeah, I know you're selling something, but so what? Okay, so I'm a small or medium-sized financial institution today. You've given me a massive amount to get my arms around, but I can't I can't do everything automatically. I don't have the team. I don't have the talent. I may not even have the knowledge of where to start. I know I asked this last time. I ask it again. Where does a financial institution start to get seen at a time when invisibility becoming a bigger and bigger risk?
Yeah, I would, very much look for, what those low hanging fruit, lower lift type items are. There's these two realms. There's what can we control within our environment. So, what are those easy wins that are on our pages to make sure that, we're, if nothing else, make sure that we're not blocking AI bots from crawling our website in the first place. So just simple things like checking, like a robots.txt file to make sure we're not purposely blocking all bots. That'd be one simple thing. Go look at little wins that we can layer into, particular pages, like those summary statements or a unique fact that stands out about the page. It would be, elements like that, while looking at, where are, if nothing else, you need the visibility to see what the impact factors are, meaning where do I need to be mentioned on the third party side that helps drive that exposure. So you need to have that visibility into what sites are driving the answers to the prompts that make sense, the topics that make sense for you, and do what you can to show up there. If you can show up in the these few right here that very often are a source for an answer on a chat GPT, and make some low hanging fruit wins and changes on the website, while leveraging your own channels, especially with AI right now, being able to recreate content into a YouTube video. YouTube's one of the top cited websites across ChatGPT, and it's the second largest search engine, and it gets pulled into Google search. So you have to find those, if you have, let's say, a finite amount of budget, a finite amount of resources, try to find those convergent, compounded wins. If I do this right here, it checks off these 7 boxes and the lift is not too large. So it's very much trying to find, isolate and find those wins that, are achievable while also, can be impactful.
Well, okay. So you mentioned YouTube, which is owned by Google, which is kind of interesting by its own dynamic. But one thing I've learned just in the podcasts that I do and the content I'm creating, that first minute is the most important. That would probably go across the line of everything a financial institution is doing. Anything they want to get seen, make sure you're putting your best foot forward very early, because if nothing else, the AI platforms and Google would have no patience. If you can't get somebody to look and stay on for a minute, let's say, and dig deeper into what you're saying, but making it so your first sentence, your first paragraph, whatever, is extraordinarily strong. You can't just wean into where you want them to go, because you don't have a captive audience, and they're going to reward how strong your content is as well, correct?
Yeah, so it's an amazing question, amazing point. So if you isolate video for a moment, in general, it's recommended, capture attention right away. But what you're seeing now is, so like a best practice, for example, is you create this video on a topic on YouTube and you're embedding it onto your, let's say, your product page. We recommend very strongly to also below it, it can even be, in an accordion, have the transcript embedded onto the page itself. Because when the LLMs land, they can scan that transcript for immediate context and relevance. So what's happening is, if you think of when you go do a search on ChatGPT and it's thinking, the AI bots, when they're sent out in a live search, they're landing and it's like, okay, what can I grab super quickly? Because I have someone waiting for an answer right now. So I don't have time to dig through this 5-minute video. Let me grab the early parts of that transcript and see, boom, or early parts of the page and get back to answering a question. So it's very much this mindset and the shift of less marketing speak and more direct helpfulness and the meat, getting to it right away. Front load credibility, front load value on the videos, in the transcripts, in your page content, things like that.
Because, at the end of the day, all these platforms want you to stay on their platforms. And so the reality at the end, my aha moment was, they're trying to sell ads. They're trying to get people engaged. And the longer you stay engaged, the better they're going to love you. And the way they're going to love you is you giving them content that keeps somebody stable there rather than going to the next place right from there. Um, so what excites you about what's coming down the road? Something that maybe not front and center right now, but as you're trying to build an AI search resilience, what kind of gets you going? You go, this is going to be interesting.
So as far as when we think about you've got the immediate, you've got the now, things you can do right now today. In parallel is, okay, where do things look to be going? What are the areas where, like, we don't want to be, caught having to be too reactive. One of the biggest things that stands out is AI mode. So right now, Google is, I'd call it teasing AI mode. It's you could see it. It's getting rolled out just a little bit more each week. Where when you go to Google.com, and you go at the end of the search bar, you see the words AI mode. So you could technically click that instead of pushing enter. Or, in the result, you can click into that tab. That's them dipping their toes. But with what they're seeing from a ChatGPT's explosive growth and adoption, it's very much on our minds and in our conversations with our clients around we have to prepare as if tomorrow or 6 months from now or 18 months from now that AI mode is not AI mode. AI mode is just Google,
It's
and
it.
the
It's
entirety.
what it is. Exactly.
Exactly. This is now the default search. So if that were to happen tomorrow, are you positioned right now to be showing up in the answers? And the answer for many will probably be not so much. So that's when we think about, and I don't mean to be
No,
doomsday,
you're
but
right.
that was the second I heard about AI mode, my first thought was, okay, this is, this could be something where this has just becomes search. So there's that factor around just, I would recommend, yes, ChatGPT is the shiny object. It has massive, massive adoption. If I had to pick one, and I'm thinking like fundamental core of our business, I would focus AI mode first. Because right now, today, if most of your conversions and business are driven from organic search, and that changes tomorrow, that's going to affect you a lot more than whether you show up in ChatGPT or not. It's very much what's going to affect the core business. So I would look to race to position for AI mode itself, and that's something we ran our own studies around, and that's something we focus very clearly on. Beyond that, if we're thinking more longer term, I'd say it's this premise of, and I don't mean the terminology to get too technical, but like agentic search, which is basically this futuristic premise of human beings not necessarily interacting on websites anymore. We'll go to the AI platform, and the AI platform becomes our agent that now, based on what we're trying to accomplish and do, they'll now scan and go to the different websites and interact with a bot on the other side. That, let's say on the brand side, developing out, their own essentially bots that now, all the different, it's basically bots interacting with bots, which is a little sad in some ways to to speak to and conceptualize. But that is something that I'd say we're definitely keeping in mind and thinking about what are those infrastructure changes that might be occurring and how to begin to dip our toes, not go throw 80% of your budget at, but begin to at least explore.
But anybody right now who's on this webinar, anybody who listens to it after we published it, be aware you've got to stay aware of yourself. The thing that blew me away in the last couple of weeks is I don't think it was me not listening, but ChatGPT now is having an ongoing conversation with me. I ask it for X. It gives me the answer to what I asked for, and then prompts me with another question going, and by the way, it's not just out there, a question out of nowhere. It's based on other things I've done with it. It said, by the way, do you want YouTube headlines, thumbnail headlines for your YouTube site? Okay, yeah, you're ahead of me, but yeah, I do. Oh, by the way, would you like me to refine your introduction paragraph to make it stronger for AI search? And what it's telling me is, mine's very composed. Yeah, I have a specific reason for using ChatGPT and Claude and others. But realize this is the way these platforms are going to be interacting with consumers who search. It's going to be the way that Google interacts. It's going to say, oh, here's your answer. By the way, based on other things you looked for in the past, you want to do this. We, as bankers and credit union executives, have got to dig into these platforms now because you can already see where they're going. As I said, completely blew me away with how deep the questions get and how very on target they were with regard to what I was looking for. I was talking to Jeffrey Pilcher from the Financial Bend. He goes, it asked me, do you want this in less AI speak? Do you want me to make sure that this doesn't look like AI? And it didn't ask, by the way, do you want me to avoid, fake answers? No, AI is so far beyond that now. It's crazy, but it learns from your interactions, just like your AI agent will learn from the way you do your banking. This is where the future is, and people have to understand that the way to get that agentic AI solution out there is going to be starting at the search level. Justin, this has been killer so far. Do we have any questions from our audience today?
Yes, I do see a question here. We're a community bank and we're very careful about where our name appears online when it comes to financial third party sites, whether it's comparison platforms, lead generators, or review sites. What should we be looking out for before getting involved with them? So, what I'd say there is first making sure that honestly that it's a platform worth engaging with. So just simple data analytics around how much influence do they have. You have to pick your spots, especially if there are elements of budget, and there's concerns around the name usage. You want to be really only engaging with the platforms that actually have that heavy influence, and use that as the first filter. If they're not being cited, it's not necessarily worth the time and effort and resources. So I would start there right off the bat, and making sure to think about how the LLMs think. I would then go to Reddit, and based on that platform, and it's one of the funnier things within Google searches, there's been this rise of term plus Reddit at the end of the Google search, because people are actively searching for what is happening, what the conversation is on Reddit. So I would take first, filter out whether they're actually impacting the answers, and then see what others are saying about that particular platform. If it's not an overly well-known one, make sure that there's nothing to be concerned about. And just I would those two items, I think it will get you a long way.
You know,
Um,
on that same answer, and you referenced it earlier, I'd be very cautious about ignoring any platform because we have teams now that are working to make it so we have a response to anything negative or anything positive that's said. Use that to our advantage. I get concerned when an organization says, well, yeah, it isn't that accurate, or, I don't really like it. We got to be really careful because I'm sorry, I'm on the long edge of age and I'm using it every day. And I'm not the only person. It's not just because I'm in the industry. We can't look at segments. We can't look at demographic groups the way we used to. People are using technology entirely differently, and the impact of any of these things can go rogue on you if you ignore it completely. Even if you don't engage with it, get your answer ready as to what you would have said in this scenario, and be ready to push that button if you have to, because you never know if it's going to explode on you in a negative or a positive way. We have time for one
100%.
more, Justin.
Yeah. I think it's a great question, this next one, because it's one of those sensational, you see the headlines around it. Is SEO dead?
Geez, I
AI
think you were
summaries.
your headline in the last podcast or the last webinar. Just
Yeah,
saying.
so it's is SEO dead? AI summaries don't drive folks to bank websites anymore. So SEO, and I know it might be a boring answer, but is definitely not dead. And it's twofold. You've got the rise of the LLMs and the rise of these various platforms. Even with all of that, Google is still the majority monster share of the market. When you like just as a search engine, they're 90 plus percent. But when you add in all of these other platforms, they're all the way down to 85% of the entire search market. They have, there's data upon data upon data that it's still the behemoth, it's still the largest driver. Yes, clicks are decreasing the more that AI summaries are occurring. What it means is that you have to account for more of a holistic search. So there might be an answer on a summary, but then they're going to maybe a Reddit thread to go read more, or they're going onto ChatGPT and they're watching a video on YouTube. But then they're eventually making their way back. And that's what the data is showing. They are making their way back. It's just Google is, in some ways, it's not the the starting and the endpoint of a destination. It's the largest, and the share of it will probably decrease more as ChatGPT adoption increases more. But even then, the SEO practices are driving so much of the outcomes of the LLM results in the
That
first place. So it's
that
like
is the
feeds it in both directions.
that is the biggest takeaway I think in this whole discussion is that it's not one or the other.
It's
Google's
and
looking at the LLMs. LLMs are leveraging Google results. So SEO is still part of the entire component on which everything else is built. But Remember that Google's also go looking at the LLMs to see how they're searching. They're replicating the world in the, as you mentioned, in the LLM or in the Chat GPT search, and that these really play off each other. You can't turn off one mentality. You just have to, unfortunately, expand upon it. Also, keep aware of what's going on in the industry. I cannot say this. Lifelong learning in every way, shape, and form is important. Justin wakes up, sleeps, dreams, eats, lives this day in, day out. Find a partner that will do that on your behalf because most firms, 99.9% of the financial firms, don't have a person or a team that can look at this in the way that's being done and continually access that information that's available. Justin, again, thank you so much for being on the webinar. You know,
Yeah,
there's so much to learn. As it was last time, I'm taking a couple takeaways because I'm learning from what you're saying on how I have to work with my audiences. But I think it's important because it's an evolving marketplace. What we said today will not be the same as we'll say 2 months from now or a month from now. It evolves, but you've got to start somewhere. Please do not put your head in the sand and say it's going to go away or I don't trust its answers. Guess what? You can help compose those answers. If the answers are untrustworthy, it means you were standing still, not paying attention to what's being said about you. And we don't like this as humans. We certainly don't like that as organizations. Justin, again, thank you and your firm for everything you're doing.
Jim, it's a delight as always. That was so
Right.
much fun.